Behind the wheel of the LX600 Lexus. People have been waiting for this update or a new version of this since I was writing the Dead Sea Scrolls in my 6 generations or my previous lives. There is a lot changed in here. The exterior, the interior, so let's just get right into it. Let's talk about the exterior briefly. This is Nori Green. This is something that we've seen on other Lexus products like the LC500. It works well on this car with its styling that is going to either turn heads or turn people the opposite direction and run away from it. This is something that Lexus has been doing with this style of vehicle and their styling in general. It doesn't look like any other product on the road, for good or for bad. It has this truck look. It definitely has a higher ride height than traditional, like larger SUVs, namely the Germans that are not body on frame. When you look at the X7s, the Q7s, the Mercedes GLS, this is definitely different. I'm not going to cover the exterior. You can watch other videos and learn all about that. But the main thing here is the interior space. This is where the changes have been just unbelievable. There are some good things and bad. So a lot of the interior styling is updated from what we really cherished on the ES cars. This modernism and geometry styling, and you even have some Lexus LS traits. And then you have like the grab handle, which looks like something out of the LC500. So they're borrowing, you can tell their interior designers like, how can we grab all the best parts and try to put it in here? The usability, mostly everything is physical for the most part. The storage space, like most Lexus vehicles, is befuddling, really. The door cards are absolutely unusable if you have large water cans or anything you really want to put in there. It's not wide enough, and it's something I complain about in other products. The center armrest makes up for a lot of that by having the dual hinging, so you can get into it as a passenger or driver, but the space in there is pretty small, to be honest. When you get to the upper trims, you get a cool box. The cup holder space is pretty good, and the upper center console area is great because they have an old traditional shifter, and all your seat heater and cooling buttons and steering wheel heater are all physical, and they do a great job of keeping most of the physical buttons and switches in here that you've expected from a Toyota or Lexus product for a long time. I love that about it, and it's one of the best parts. Now, one of the worst parts about the front part of this vehicle is this seems like it was in a development mishmash. I feel like they started designing the center stack area before they decided they were going to change out their infotainment. So what you have is this conflicting design between the gauge cluster, the infotainment, and this center screen that controls like HVAC but kind of doesn't. They're all very disconnected and redundant in certain ways. Like while the infotainment feels ultra modern and this new wave, this new generation of cloud-connected mapping from Google Maps and all that, it doesn't really match up with the old Lexus gauge cluster and the information it provides. For example, like if I turn off the screen on the main head unit, I have to turn off the center screen for the HVAC. And then whenever I adjust the volume, it tells you the volume in the HUD, in the gauge cluster. It turns back on the screen, the main screen, to show you things. It's just not all well integrated. And I think that's where I'm going to leave it for this. I feel like they didn't have cohesive discussion on how they wanted to blend it together. And then visually, the screen tacked on up here, including where the volume knob is and how far you actually have to move your arm over. And I'm in a very close position of the steering wheel. It's very hard for me to interact with the screen, and it just looks so afterthought. They're like, we have to put the new system in here, but we really don't know how to integrate it into the dash. And this is just really, compared to like what we've seen in the LC and the LS and the ES, this is definitely a step backwards. Now, in terms of seating comfort, ultra luxury, of course, this is the best you're going to get. The seats in the front are incredible, although there is no massaging function, which is crazy to me in a car. You know, sit back. This is $130,000. So there's certain things here from a luxury perspective that I have high expectations that would be here compared to some of the German competitors that are not. But the big thing is when you get in the back seats, okay, you have this executive seating package. The seat behind the driver, and I kid you not, does not adjust forward or back. It is in a fixed position. You can recline, but you can't move forward and back. So that means if the driver is taller in the front, the passenger behind you is like sandwiched back there. And it is just, I can't believe that they did this for a car of this type, an SUV of this type. Now, where they make up for it is in the passenger side, where you can literally recline the seat with a footrest, so you can recline. The back seats are massaging. and which is a great thing, and the massagers are pretty good, and the overall comfort is amazing for 4 people. But then you look at the back cargo area, like putting a car seat in the back of this thing is very difficult. You have to climb through the hatch to get the anchors in. So if you're looking at it as a family vehicle, it's a lot more work to get into. The doors don't open at a 90-degree angle, front or back. And you can see this is the maximum this door opens, and much like the back, it does not open a large way, so getting in the back of the car or in the back of the truck, if you're a bigger person, is difficult. Squeezing a car seat in there or getting a kid in and out is a lot more frustrating. You have an SUV that's not like the most configurable. It doesn't have the most flexibility for passengers, and it doesn't have like the little ergonomic things you want with all of the bits and pieces you want to store in here. All of those details combined makes me question the price point that this is at and who this is really for. One of the other areas that's disappointing compared to some of the other Lexus products is the Mark Levinson audio system, and I know 100% why, and you just have to know a little bit to know. Taking a look at where the driver placement is. The mid-range driver is stuffed behind this giant grab handle, which feels amazing. Like the build quality of the door is great, but the speaker's hidden there, and the way that the upper tweeters or the tweeters are mounted on the dashboard reflecting off the glass, the imaging in here is really bad, and there's not a lot of configurability. The audio menu is buried in the infotainment. You have really 3 options. You have 3D, 2D, and just off. When you have it off, it becomes very monaural. There's not good stereo separation, and it's just a very flat sounding experience, just not in a good way. When you switch it over to 2D, yes, it widens the soundstage. 3D widens it more, but it gives you that more DSP kind of reverb effect. I've never found a way to configure this where it has like a really neutral, good sounding, something like that you get out of the LS, the LC, and the ES. And again, I think a lot of this is speaker placement, but you can see the charts. But let's get in the shop. There is so much mechanical stuff to cover. The Lexus LX600, Jack. Truck-based SUV, but this is all new on a brand new architecture for Toyota. And this Japanese-made SUV carries a lot of changes. Talk me through it.
Not only a lot of changes, a lot of history. So obviously this is the LX. This is the Lexus variant of the Toyota Land Cruiser. This is the first implementation of this version of TNGA-F, which is their truck-based platform. It's the same platform that you're seeing used on the American Tundra and the Sequoia. The big difference between this and the prior generation is obviously improved suspension geometry, and they've dropped a tremendous amount of weight out of this platform. They dropped a little bit over 400 pounds, which is a big deal for a modern vehicle to lose weight. From a body structure perspective, they have aluminum front and rear doors, but it still weighs an eye-watering, when fully loaded, almost 6,000 pounds. So this is a big boy.
Yeah, and that's what you expect for this. You're not buying this to be like, 3,000 pound.
This is not a Miata.
Ultra exotic, yeah. So you said it carries a lot of history, but they're carrying over a lot of the same stuff or new stuff?
So it's always been a body on frame truck. It still prioritizes its ability to go off-road. And the key off-roading numbers, like approach, departure, and waterfording numbers, are still identical. That is unchanged. The way it accomplishes its ability to go off-road, they've refined and improved. So the big thing is in the front. The suspension geometry is a little better than it used to be, or the shocks have a little bit more rebound than they used to, and they have claimed that their revisions to their drive modes have made this a far more capable vehicle. Do you want to walk me through how this suspension setup is different than a more traditional air ride spring?
Luxury cars typically have 2 different types of suspensions, Jack. You have air springs, which is a compressor that inflates and deflates the springs and can change the spring rate. It can also raise and lower the ride height. Then you have MagneRide dampers on some of the products like the GMs that are electronically controlling the magnetics in the shock to stiffen and decrease the stiffness.
And they can still pair those with regular air bladders as well.
Correct. So you have a good consistency of performance, ride quality, ride height. This opts for something a bit different. You still have coil springs, traditional coil springs front and back. And you have traditional dampers that can be electronically adjusted, and the valving can be adjusted to firm or hard or softer. But this has the addition of 4-corner hydraulically controlled actuators and accumulators. So there's 2 external canisters. They move the canisters off the shock so they can change oil flow. And then those feed lines run to the shock absorbers themselves, which helps to raise and lower the car quickly. It's not just like you're waiting 3 minutes. You can change the ride height, but it's also maintaining pressure in the accumulator. So it constantly has that hydraulic load there that can change each corner of this car independently to level ride height, to change shock damping, to change ride height independently. And this is a very high-end system that really is responsible for not only a soft ride, ultra soft ride, something that magnetic shocks can't do, and it can also firm up the suspension to a high level as it needs to for like off-roading. If you lift one wheel, you can keep one wheel soft so that compression changes or rebound changes while you're firming up the other one. And that's why this is so sophisticated. However, it does not have electronically controlled or disconnecting sway bars.
Yes, and when it comes to the ride height, they have 4 specific and different ride heights. There is normal, high, and extra high, and then an entry and exit mode as well. So when you're stopping this vehicle and you're getting in and out, it's at the lowest setting. It has a relatively low setting when you're on the highway and doing regular driving. And when you're going off-road, you can get up really, really high if you're doing some rock crawling. When it comes to the off-road capability of this vehicle, this car does not have locking front and rear diffs, but it does have a low-range gearbox and terrain modes that help mitigate the lack of traditional lockers. However, you can get a limited slip differential, some revised suspension tuning with the F Sport model. The limited slip is only in the rear and it's a Torsen.
Gotcha. So the last thing to talk about is drivetrain, Jack, because that's one of the biggest changes here too. Gone are the days of the V8 and now their corporate twin-turbo V6, which first made its appearance on the Lexus LS500, the luxury car, but that has been massively updated for its truck platforms, which we talked a bit about, or Jack talked a bit about, on the new Tundra. It's a carryover there with the 10-speed direct shift gearbox that has also been altered in terms of cooling, shift logic. So it's the same gearbox you would find in the LS500, the LC500, heavily modified for the truck platform. So what we know is it's way quicker to respond. It's way more direct. You have wider gear ratios for fuel economy that help the twin-turbo V6. And it can also double for truck duty and towing capacity.
Yes.
So it's this modular concept that most manufacturers are doing to make this huge investment on an engine or drivetrain platform scalable across multiple cars.
It's worthwhile watching that video specifically for those interviews. Yes, it kind of looks like a hostage film because
Yeah.
they didn't want to be there on camera.
They were burned up. They
But-
were answering questions all day.
They're very nice guys and they're very knowledgeable, and it's worth watching because a lot of the drivetrain changes made to the Tundra carry over to this thing.
Let's get this thing on the road. I think we'll see what this has done compared to the old version of the Land Cruiser and LX.
Perfect.
Jack, LX600, ultra luxury.
I like the way that sounds, Mark.
Let's see what ultra luxury. Can't even talk. Let's see what ultra luxury feels like in sport mode. This thing's moving.
Do you miss the V8?
I do, but I don't. And here's why I don't miss the V8. So the fuel economy, and I played around with this quite a bit because it's a big reason why Toyota would have switched over to this. So on average, I'm getting 17 miles per gallon mixed. Now you might think about that and laugh, but if you've ever driven a Toyota V8, you'll know 100% that most of the time you're only getting 13 miles to the gallon. So that's a 4 mile per gallon bump. Now, what does that do in terms of drivability? This engine is way more responsive. It's faster. The transmission performance is way sharper than the old gearbox. But is it really better? And I think that's the one thing that I've been contemplating my entire drive for a boat like this, because I have definitely had some transmission performance issues in terms of shift quality, and I drive this around in comfort mode all the time. And granted, this only has about 400 miles on it, so shift logic and all that the patterns might be sorting itself out, but rolling up to a stop and turning left or something, and like basic driving, I've had parts where the transmission would go in a neutral state, get lost, and then slam shift into first, and some really weird herky-jerky stuff. And then I've had really interesting and confusing surging problems just starting off and rolling from a start where you're getting like this bucking feeling, and it almost feels like engine tuning issues. But that's the biggest concern I had about driving this test car.
Which is odd because I spent a lot of time in the Tundra during the launch, and we're getting another one as a press car next week. But when I was in the Tundra, which is the same platform, essentially the identical drivetrain, I didn't have those problems.
Okay.
So it could be this vehicle, it could be the added complexity of the four-wheel drive system causing issues, but I think for most people who are looking for a hyper expensive, and this is expensive any way you cut it, starts at 88, the ones most people are going to be buying are in the mid-90s to about 100. You can forget about this one at 127 or
yeah,
whatever it is.
and I'm just going to leave it out there. This review is skewed towards the upper trim. I don't think you should buy this. I think it's much like the LS with the executive package, where you have the glass in the doors. It ramps up the price by like a significant amount.
To the point where it's no longer competitive.
Yeah, it doesn't really add anything. So I think personally, the $105,000 point is the sweet spot with the 3 rows, decent back seats that adjust, and then you get most of the luxury features.
But to most people, the drivetrain, right? The people that aren't us who are driving this like a dick are going to like the really low down torque, the better fuel economy.
Yeah, it is an improvement in drivability. Is it an improvement over the long haul? That's something we don't know yet, and I don't want to judge that. So all you can do is compare this on paper with the competitors that are body on frame, which let's cover that briefly.
So of the ones that are focused on their ability to go off-road, like the LX, like the Land Cruiser, you have the Grand Wagoneer, which I can't believe I'm saying this, has a much better interior space. It's a bigger interior space. You have some of the luxury bullshit that I didn't think would ever come on a Jeep that don't come on this Lexus. The massagers are only in the back seats for this thing. You can get them in the front with the Jeep. Yes, the audio system in the Jeep isn't amazing, but nor is this one.
Well, the Jeep has one of the worst audio systems we tested.
It's really
in
bad.
a different and opposite direction of this. And I would say in most ways, the Jeep interior is more well thought out and cohesive. But, you could argue material and fit and finish, where I think the fit and finish and material choices here is better, but the layout and the way they've implemented technology is far worse. I think this is the worst implementation of technology compared to all the body-on-frame luxury SUVs. And when you compare it to, like, the Escalade, oh my God. The Escalade is on another planet, and granted, it's probably the most disposable of all of them, but you're looking at a luxury product first. So
and then you have the Navigator, which is very old, but huge, and it's about to get updated, so that's unfair. Moving into the luxury 3 rows that are European, you have the Range Rover, which again is about to get updated, but people love Range Rovers for...
You're buying that for a different
prestige
reason.
reasons.
You're buying that for this, and you don't care about anything else.
And then if you look at the German competitors that are 3 rows, you have the X7, which you own, you have a Audi Q7, and you have the GLS giant 3-row Merc. Those vehicles, purely from a luxury car, I'm never going to go off-road, like most LX owners won't. Like, let's say 96% of LX owners are never going to leave this regular paved road. Those vehicles do the luxury thing better because this still rides like it's on a truck platform.
Yeah, I don't know, man. I would argue that a little bit. I think this is pretty much perfected. I don't know what more you can do with body on frame to make it ride like a real.
It's the compromise that it is body on frame.
I understand that, but you're customers that are buying this want body on frame, and they've essentially taken 90% of the harshness out of that. And I think that's the best part of this. I think the fit and finish, the feel, the quality, the isolation that this gives you is one of the best in class, and the ride refinement for body on frame is really, really good here.
But going back to the Escalade, the MR dampers in that with the air springs, you make a much better job.
You make the best point. All the competitors have caught up, even Jeep. So everybody does a good job. So you're splitting hairs over that 5 to 10% refinement. This is great, but so are the competitors. So that leaves you with the question of what are you getting here that you're literally not getting with the competitors at this point?
Other than, in my mind, the ability for these things to go off-road, which even without the crazy locking diffs that the Jeep has, the Land Cruiser and the LX historically have been very capable. You have a wonderful dealer experience with Lexus dealers. And you have the hypothetical reliability that goes in these products. I spoke to the Tundra engineers, and they went on and on about assuring us that these things are going to be reliable. We talked about it in the shop segment. The early problems with the Tundra have me questioning that long-term reliability, but this might be...
This is no Lexus or Toyota V8. No. We know that already. We know that from talking to mechanics and the people that have been working on these engines. It's far more complicated than the previous engine and harder to work on. Whether it's going to be reliable in the long term is another factor. We know the 10-speed's been really, really stout in the LC500, and the modifications to this should make it even more stout. But we're talking about the hypothetical of reliability that we don't know exists on a luxury product.
Company culture dictates Lexus is not building hyper-disposable garbage cans. You talk to, hell, even my favorite brands like Porsche, BMW, the Euro brands, they're kind of like good luck once you're out of the warranty.
Yeah.
It's not our problem anymore, where
Yeah.
Lexus has never been that way.
And the residuals for Lexus trucks
Yes.
have been categorically insane compared to all the competitors. So I guess, like every single car and truck we look at, there's an enormous amount of compromise that you have to make between the brands. There's no one perfect truck, SUV, luxury product, because it depends on your brand biases.
Until
and all the
Cayenne
other things.
becomes 3 rows
Yeah,
for me.
yeah, until the Cayenne, or until it has a Porsche badge on it, and then
man,
it's
this
perfect
thing's
for you.
incredible.
Yeah, and you're on pole position. So where does that leave that, Jack? Should we just get into the final thoughts and sum this up?
Yeah, I think it's a good time, Mark.
All right.
Final thoughts on the LX600 Ultra Luxury. To be honest, you or I are probably not going to buy a $125,000 LX600. You're going to be buying one that costs between $88,000 and $100,000. And what this thing does best is it is a very refined, very capable off-roader. However, it's compromised in many ways versus its European counterparts, or even American counterparts. The interior space, if you are looking at it from a pure luxury perspective, kind of leaves the front occupants a little bit cold. It doesn't have the latest technology. And the rear space isn't that great, particularly if you're going to use this to haul kids. You can't really fit a car seat back there, and it lacks some of the interior storage that even the Grand Wagoneer and some of the German counterparts do much better. But that being said, the LX600 historically has great residual values. It's probably going to be pretty reliable despite some of the unknowns of the new platform. And if you love Japanese vehicles, there's really nothing else like this on the market. Thanks for watching. Hope to see you soon.